All right, let's keep moving. So, Geoff, let's turn to you. First of all, explain to everybody, what is the Microsoft Advertising Brand Studio for those of people who don't know?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Afdel. So we basically work with customers, clients, non-customers alike, basically to activate interesting campaigns, innovations that tie in a lot of the research that we have in regard to advertising. So, if we have interesting research on where people are, what people are doing in terms of communications, how do we bring that to life to inspire people to think in new ways? I think, we're always looking for that. Even, what someone was asking me recently, do you think that's relevant even during a time right now? And of course, I came back with some data saying that every innovative company or offering has happened during an economic downturn because people become more creative. They try to find things with less money, and they try to do things with less money and find solutions. So I've been sort of busy trying to figure out what are those next solutions? What could they look like? Especially if you're at home, how do you bring the shopping experience to someone's living room? How do you think about how we discover things in a new fashion? There's a lot of really interesting platforms that are out there, and it's funny to watch them take off because, as you know, Afdel, they're all remixes of the past. These things that people get excited about in terms of, hey, I was invited to an exclusive meeting that only 12 people were in. And I said, hey, that reminds me of the phone party line from the 1980s, or maybe going to a rave in the 1990s. I mean, all this exclusivity that people think is, new on the internet has already existed. So those are things that we are fascinated with watching and seeing how that plays out into, new forms of advertising.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's tell us a little bit about the survey stuff you put out there, and then let's dive into it. Yeah, please go ahead and talk.
Yeah. So, before I share some slides of some data, what we were looking at and what's really interesting to us were, what are like the most important factors right now for, brand purchase. We're in a unique situation in the world right now where we did want to know, like, hey, what is motivating people? Because that I think if brands understand that, they can tailor their messages, communication, their even their supply chain management strategy around where people are right now, where their behaviors are, where their consumption is happening. The second question we wanted to ask is, where is that purchase behavior? Where is it happening? There's a tendency of many of us as armchair strategists, I like to call, to say like, oh, hey, physical stores are now gone because no one is interested in going out and shopping. You have to look at that in context now, Afdel, as we've seen that, yes, online shopping is up, but physical stores are still important because a lot of people still rely on them to buy groceries. So obviously that's not an area that's going to go away. Even if someone says, hey, I've been ordering my groceries online and they're delivering them, a large percentage of people still rely on physical stores to do that. In fact, we've identified a trend called BOPIS, B-O-P-I-S. That's buy online, purchase, buy online, pick up in store.
Yeah.
So some more marketing language for all of us to take away and say, oh, geez, another term out there that, is going to stick. But that is something that we've seen. The third one is, how important is a brand's, COVID-19 communication strategy when it comes to branding? Because if you think about it, there's a tendency of many of us in marketing and communications to say, oh, I don't want to hear anything about COVID-19. I mean, I think all of us may be familiar with, there's a video circulating around the web showing how every COVID-19 television ad is the same. The thing is, marketers are going to make fun of that, but regular people who we depend on to actually support brands, they actually are very interested in COVID-19 communication strategy. In
Mm.
fact, when we dive in, we will realize that that basically 40% want to hear more from a brand and a company on what their COVID-19 strategy is in terms of protecting that company's employees,
Mm.
as well as how they're going to protect the customers. So these are all interesting things that we might say, oh wow, I don't know if messaging is really important. What we've actually discovered is messaging is important at this time. It's just that it has to be clear, it has to be concise, and it has to be simplified. And it is on things that maybe would fall to, you know, a public relations team at a company now has to get involved, which is, hey, how are we going to
Yeah.
basically talk about how we're protecting our employees?
Mm.
I mean, it's one thing for companies or for consumers to say, I want to purchase from that company. But what we're seeing is in the research is a large percentage are interested in what's that company doing on the back end to protect, you know, me as a
Mm.
customer as well as the employees. And that ties into purpose. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole thing that
Yeah.
we talk about. I mean, so, you know, let's dive in a little
Yeah.
bit to some
Yeah,
of
let's do it.
these slides, basically.
Cool.
Yeah, here we go. So on the first one, which basically is asking the question, and we did this research with Suzy, which is a really great software as a service research company that we partner with a lot with at Microsoft. You know, we were curious on like what are the areas that are important in terms of factors for you know, what makes people purchasing, you know, want to purchase right now. And the reason this is important is because, again, I think we can tailor our brand strategy around this. Not surprisingly, discounts and offers and free shipping were the top two most important factors for non-essential purchases. Now, why is this important? One, I think this is the area for a lot of brands who may not be known, they may not be known by a number of people to actually increase their brand strategy so they're discovered by more people. So, you know, one way that they could do that is through discounts and offers and free shipping. One thing that we did see also on here is that, you know, fast shipping has really actually come down. So for a long period of time, there were a number of companies that were saying, hey, we're going to try to figure out how to get, you know, materials to people that same day. That there's less interest now because I think we're much more patient as humans, and we're actually just looking for, hey, I'd rather take the free shipping or the discount to discover what your brand is. Look at some of the sampling efforts. One thing that I thought was really interesting here, and you know, not to scare us, is environmentally friendly efforts were sort of lower on the scale, but you have to look at that in context right now. I think on the back end, people aren't really thinking about that as much as COVID-19 related efforts. That's really sort of like front and center. I think, you know, when it comes to environment, the environmental friendly side of this perspective, if we ask these same questions in a period of time when, let's say COVID-19 is in the rear view mirror and less of a threat or a risk, that might increase again, because we have seen that in a lot of interesting research you know, from the past that was really important. So those are things I think, you know, for companies in terms of how they can use, you know, maybe free shipping or discounts and offers to be discovered by people who don't use their brand. That's really important, you know, in terms of discoverability. The second area in terms of, you know, where is that purchase behavior? So in the last 4 weeks, we've seen some interesting, you know, activity. One is, we asked the questions, you know, have you spent more than you typically do in a particular area? Do you spend less in a particular area? Or are you spending about the same? And what we found is that where people are spending basically more is, you know, through social media. So a lot of people who are getting basically targeted advertisements on social media, they are clicking on those and actually trying to discover brands a little bit more. Search engines are a huge factor still. We haven't seen any real dip in activity. In fact, I think the lead time in research has increased because people do have a little bit more time to actually research things and figure out, what they need. And then the other areas is basically online retail sites, which makes sense. These are your Amazons, Jets, Targets, and eBays of the world. So we have seen, obviously, purchase behavior in those areas basically increase. Where we have seen people spending less is obviously on the physical store side or the online brand side. Again, not saying that physical stores are in trouble here. It's just that more people have shifted, maybe buying specific elements from online. In terms of like groceries and things like that, that's still a huge area of importance in terms of how people go about purchasing. So this shouldn't really come across too surprising to see, hey, search, social, and online retail have increased. That's interesting. I think the one golden nugget here for brands to think about is, what is their brand site going to do? What we've seen, at least some growth on that, is people spending more there than they typically do. Is, how do brands actually build the digital storefront of the future so they may rely less on retailers? This is interesting because obviously from a brand messaging side of the spectrum, you can get more of that across if people are actually coming to your digital storefront than you're going through a third party. And off Dell, it's interesting now because we're in a world again where I think there's going to be a battle between some brands and the retailers that they've used. We're starting to see this in a number of different industries. The movie industry being one. They don't necessarily want to go through partners of the past, like movie theaters, to distribute their product. It sort of reminds me of a remix from the early 2000s when, you had digital music basically, causing friction with physical stores that were selling music at the time, the Towers, the Virgin Megastores, et cetera. I think we could be in the same sort of area when it comes to, purchase behavior, in those areas. Brand discovery differed a little bit for men and women slightly. What we were seeing in some of this areas is women were buying more from social media posts. Men were actually asking more friends and family recommendations. I would actually love to know, based on this, and it might be a follow-up question that I ask in research, is where was how are men basically asking those questions? Are they asking basically their friends and family through digital channels and then doing digital research? I mean, these are things that, again, it's hard to figure out what the overall customer journey might be, but there is a little bit of difference in terms of discovery based on gender that we found.
Hey, Geoff, real quick, just
Sure.
wanted to mention, some of your slides may be getting cut off at the bottom, so I'll let you know.
I'm sorry.
But it's okay. Keep going. I'll keep you posted.
Okay, sounds good. The big sort of takeaway that we found from how important is a brand's COVID-19 communication strategy is the sort of two nuggets here is 27% purchased from a brand specifically due to their COVID-19 response. So again, if we think about what a brand's mission or purpose was in terms of their communication, that's a pretty healthy fact. That's a pretty healthy number here in terms of how many actually saw a message around this and said, hey, I'm going to actually investigate that brand. And then 40% of those consumers appreciate the brand's message to the public. So regardless of all of the marketing speak that we see out there on, hey, how important is it to communicate what a brand's message is? This is basically a decent number actually to look at in terms of how important that is. I think the other interesting data that we had was that 95% will continue to buy from these brands post COVID-19. So I think this is an interesting opportunity for a lot of brands to be discovered, if possible, through a lot of their messaging. And that's an interesting discussion. I think a lot of marketers, PR representatives, brand managers should be having, because this, again, I think is something that's long tail in terms of, the situation that we're in. And for each company, it's a little bit different. How will this play out, and how will companies continue to communicate on that is very interesting. One other thing I wanted to bring up is 37% will stop purchasing from a brand that is not sharing communications around the company's COVID-19 policy to keep employees and customers safe. That's 37%. And Opdel, we know, based on how social media and Twitter and Facebook act, that 37% could become 90% in a matter of hours, depending on how brands particularly behave. I think they are more under the microscope now than ever. And people are really, sort of questioning, hey, what is the ethics of that brand? And I think that is an important thing for us to continue to note. What is the ethics of some of these companies? How are they treating their employees? How are they treating their customers? Are they basically having a very transparent communication strategy? I think those are interesting, discussions for companies to have. So as basically, I noted here, sorry, I wasn't showing the actual slide itself, but I think the big takeaway here is that 70% of those who purchase from a brand, as we said, of a brand specifically because of their response to COVID-19, are purchasing either new brands or a mix of new and familiar brands. I think we're seeing some of this retro or novelty factor right now. I think when people are over inundated with a ton of decision making, they sort of turn to who they depend. I think that's one reason why we're seeing a lot of brands who have been around for quite a bit of time. If we look at our sort of word cloud here, where they're basically saying, okay, hey, I know that brand, I depend on that brand, they make sort of good products, I'll sort of utilize them. But I think there's the ability for, if we look at the mix of new and familiar, there's the ability to basically go after a lot of, if you're a new brand, how are you discovered right now? If you're a challenger brand, what are the moves that you can make that basically call more attention to, what you're trying to do at this moment in time? So those are interesting factors that we basically have. And then of course, I just want to call out that we have a ton more data that we collect at Microsoft Advertising from our search activity on Bing, and we've set up microsoftadvertising.com/COVID. If anybody watching the webinar today wants to just go and look at some of the COVID-19 data that we have out there in terms of how brands are behaving, how consumers are behaving, what things they're searching for, how verticals have basically changed. Areas that I think we want more and more people to tap into. So, cool. Again, appreciate the opportunity, Opdel, and it was a lot of fun in terms of it's very interesting, I think, to continue to watch as behavior evolves over the past 8 weeks.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Geoff.